in your book, you did a little history lesson, and we talked about this. We talked about how we were going to do this on the drive back in from Reno. Back in 1934, and for those of you who don't, I spent a little bit of time working for a firm that named E.F. Hutton, which everybody listened. And among the licenses that I had to get was one called the Series 7, which even today, those folks who consider themselves the masters of the universe have to take the test and get. And one of the things they do is they teach you a little history lesson about how things came about, like the Securities Act of 1934. Back in those days, we were just recovering from the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt took two guys, John Rockefeller and Joseph Kennedy, aside, and he said, okay, you made yours, the robber barons, you made yours, now I want you to write a law so it can never happen again. And that's how the Securities Act of 1934 came about. We went through World War II, we went through the post-war era, we went through Dwight Eisenhower warning us about the military-industrial complex. We never had an Enron, we never had a WorldCom, we never had a banking crisis like the one that we just got through, if we're really through it. What happened?
Let me just start off with the basics of what banking is about. And I call it the money industry. Whether it's whether it's insurance, a savings and loan, a bank, an investment banking firm, or any organization that deals with money. So let's just lump them together, as I do in the book, and call it the money industry. The money industry has two functions. The first function is to be a safeguard, to trust. You put your money in, you're going to get your money back. Banks have, the money industry has a fiduciary responsibility to hold your money. The second function that the money industry has is to take this great reservoir of capital, of money, is to calculate risk, and then in that risk to loan the money, whether it be to farmers or to businessmen or to build factories, and to do it under some prudent reserve requirements, that for every dollar of reserve you have, every dollar that you have, maybe you'll lend $4 or $5 or $6. Now, in the Depression, what happened is commercial banks and investment banks were the same. They were together. And in that, you wound up in the mid to late 20s, you got wild speculation. And in that speculation, on this side, on assessing risk, the banks started lending money and making bets at 20 and 30 to 1, their capital reserves. And then when things went down, they didn't have money to handle it. And so what they did is they wound up collapsing here on the safeguard side. You literally had something like 9,000 banks go down in 1932 and early 1933. So the first thing that the Roosevelt administration did is they did two things. They passed something called the Glass-Steagall Act. It was the formal title was the Banking Act of 1933, and they split commercial banks and investment banks. If you were going to speculate as a bank, then you were not going to be able, you were going to have a firewall, you were not going to be able to take down the commercial banking system of the country. And then, pardon me, then the next year, what happened is they passed the Securities and Exchange Commission, as Fred mentioned. And FDR famously said in a private conversation when he put Joe Kennedy, who had been one of the sharpest robber barons in Wall Street, you set a thief to catch a thief. And so they put the SEC in to have reporting with companies to make sure investors had a fair shot and they knew what was happening. That system worked marvelously well. until you began in the 1980s when we started to strip away, through regulatory deregulation, strip away those particular controls. Now, my editor told me a story that of the class of 1950 at Princeton, class of 1950, only one member of the graduating class went into banking because banking was dull. Banking was a dull business. You took in money, you paid 2%, you loaned it out at 4 or 5%, you played golf on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, they used to call it the rule of threes. You paid 3% on savings, you loaned it out 3% more, and you were on the golf course by 3.
That's, very safe. But what it did, it focused money, and it sent that money back into the economy for productive activities.
Like building houses.
Like building houses or factories or, a million different things. But the bankers saw on the investment or the risk side ways to change that. And we began a form of what I called compensation looting on that side. And what would happen on that side is that they would say, okay, our pay is based on our performance, and so then they would be willing to take other people's money and engage in speculation.
Now, they weren't speculating with their own money.
No. They're speculating with the money that had been put in to the Merrill Lynch, to whatever firm.